Testes, testes, one,
That's
two,
good.
three. That's what we used to do in high school when he did mic checks. We were all, teenage boys and kind of rowdy and maybe skittish about sexuality. Testes, testes, one, two, three. You're supposed to say testing, one, two, three. How do you find out if a girl is ticklish? You give her a test tickle. The Lisa was, I guess Apple didn't realize it at the time, but the Lisa was the prototype for the Macintosh. We were trying to build an office computer, and it was very graphical based, but it cost too much. So it wasn't really a success in the marketplace, but it laid the foundation that the Mac became. Mac became sort of the folks' Lisa, the computer for the rest of us, and was more affordable. After the UCSD Pascal system shipped on the Apple II, Steve Jobs asked me to go work on this new project called the Lisa. And I had ported the graphics for the Apple II into the UCSD Pascal system, so I got to work on the graphics for the Lisa. And I was the main user interface guy and graphics guy for the Lisa. Well, some of the very early designs were that it would be more graphically oriented and it would use a full bitmap display. On the Apple II, you could kind of put a character in a location, or they did have something called high-res graphics that was kind of a bitmap display, but it had its limitations. And the display on the Lisa would be full bitmap, and we wanted to be more graphically oriented. And one of the things that I had to do for that was figure out how to make that performant enough that you could actually do real applications with a full bitmap, where you had to set and clear lots more pixels to do any job. Yeah, we wanted to make computers more friendly for people. We wanted to make computers that people who were more musically inclined or artistically inclined would want to use. Computers that where you type something in and it types something back to you were sort of just too nerdy for most people to want to use. And we really sort of had a mission of making computers more user-friendly. And sometimes we goofed around and we said that they had to be more loser-friendly. But we wanted to make them more accessible and user-friendly. Steve Jobs had a poster of, he talked about how the computer could be an amplifier for the mind. And he talked about a Scientific American study of efficiency of locomotion of different species. And man wasn't really the most efficient. A condor could get a lot more miles of travel per kilocalorie of energy. But the Scientific American study put in a ringer, which was man riding a bicycle, which beat the condor. So for a while, the project name on the Macintosh later was Bicycle. And we had so we called it Wheels for the Mind. And we had a poster on the wall that showed a wheelchair and a brain sitting on it, and we called it Wheelchairs for the Mind. We were a little irreverent.
So when did you begin working on...
But we didn't admit that was Steve Jobs' daughter's name. It was locally integrated systems architecture, which is just that's a cover job. It was really named after
So would you say a lot of
Steve's daughter.
and coworkers stuff felt like, oh no, it's definitely named after his daughter?
We knew that.
Okay.
But it wasn't going to be the finished name when we sell it. That's just a code name of the project. And sort of it stuck. No, initially it was called Lisa Graph, because it was the graphics for Lisa. But it wasn't renamed QuickDraw until we started thinking about the Macintosh and realized, we better have a name that's not just to the Lisa, because it's also the same exact code is going to be running on the Macintosh. So I started working on that right after the UCSD Pascal system shipped. So in the very beginning of the project. Initially, the Lisa hardware was going to be a bit slice processor, custom to Apple. And nobody else in the world would have one that had the same instruction set. It would be, custom bit slice. And Rich Page saved the day because he found that Motorola had gotten good silicon on the first turn on the 68000, and which was a beautiful processor that had a big wide address space. And he pretty much drove the decision to switch over to the 68000. It was fast enough that optimized assembly language could do the job fast enough that you didn't have to go to some fancy bit slice processor to do it. And that was really good because there were assemblers for that, and there were development environment, and other people would learn 68000 assembly language. Nobody was going to learn Apple's custom one of a kind bit slice language. Meaner
or tougher? Something. What was it?
He said
something like I was a little bit more
tough.
I don't know, tough on people or something. But now he's a lot.
I think he was passionate and knowledgeable and insisted on doing things the best way, and that helped the whole project. I liked working with Rich.
Yeah, he seems like a really nice guy.
Had only nice things to say about you too.
Oh. Mutual Admiration Society here.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote the initial version of the Lisa window manager. It sort of has to play along with the graphics because when you've got overlapping windows, you've got to set up clipping regions such that the graphics can draw into the portion of a window that's visible, even though it's covered by some other windows, so it's not just a rectangle. And that really required a little bit of collaboration with the window manager. So I wrote the window manager, and then I wrote the event manager. The processor is sort of sitting there in a little loop saying, is anything happening? Is anything happening? Did any characters get typed? Does the mouse move? And in old time computing days, the processor time was the most important thing. But now people time was the most important thing. It didn't matter if the processor was sitting there in a loop, wasting cycles, looking to see has anything happened, as long as it could be responsive when a person did something. So I did the event manager. And then I did the menu manager. Now the menu manager was the pull-down menus and how they all work together. All three of those, the window manager, which I think Mac later called the desktop manager, or maybe Lisa called it desktop manager and Mac called it the window manager or Finder or something.
Okay, yeah.
Well, Finder was something more than just the window manager. Okay. Finder also had to do with filing and stuff like that. So I did the window manager, event manager, and menu manager for the Lisa, and I did the QuickDraw graphics primitives. Now the QuickDraw graphics primitives were really the core of the meat here that allowed the graphical user interface to be practical. And all of those, Andy Hertzfeld took my Lisa window manager, event manager, menu manager, translated them into assembly language just to squeeze them down into a small ROM, and took all of QuickDraw. And the original Macintosh ROM had two-thirds of the code was code that I wrote for Lisa. It wasn't a leave one and go to the other. I was an honorary member of both. For a long time, I was on the Lisa project and on the Mac project.
Okay.
Well, Jeff Raskin got me.
Or Jeff Raskin. I'm sorry, speak to
it
that
wasn't,
a little bit. So you can see even I'm
okay, well.
And I've read about this plenty of times.
Jeff Raskin is the father of the Macintosh project.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to make an information appliance, a computer that would do what it did when you bought it and wasn't expected to do any more. And at some point, Steve Jobs took the project away from him and turned it into a platform, wanting to make it a little Lisa, a folks Lisa, kind of a computer for the rest of us. The difference between a platform and a product is that the product will keep doing new things. Next year, you expect new software to come out that allows it to do something more. And that's really where the crux of the fight between Steve Jobs and Jeff Raskin came. Jeff started this project, and Steve took it away from him to turn it into a platform. And so if you had to say, I'd say that Jeff Raskin is the father of the Macintosh project, but that Steve is the father of the shipping Macintosh. Well, the Mac was supposed to be last too. when we were first doing it, we thought it was going to be $9.99, and then it kind of crept up to $14.99, and it was $14.99 for a long time, and then sort of getting near the end, Scully put a big chunk on it to make it so we had marketing money, and that jumped it up to $24.99, and we were the people on the team were really upset about that. At some point, there became sort of a race between John Couch and Steve Jobs, and I think Lisa project was taking longer than expected, and I don't know what happened. Steve kind of got pushed out of the Lisa project and wanted to go do a faster, cheaper version of it with the Mac. No, we knew that right from the start. That was the purpose.
So that was kind of
how can we make a cheap Lisa? How can we make a folks Lisa?
They're just in the Lisa project. You think a lot of them realized that early on
yes.
too? Okay.
Yeah, and it was a good idea, and we thought, great. I remember at one offsite talking to Bruce Daniels on the Lisa team, and he had the insight. So Lisa and Mac weren't exactly compatible. There were a number of differences between them, and one of them being square pixels versus rectangular pixels, and others the way the system software worked and things like that. And what Bruce Daniels' insight was that stuck with me is it doesn't matter which came first. It matters which there are lots of for developers to develop. And it won't be the Macintosh that's not Lisa compatible. It's to be the Lisa that's not Macintosh compatible. Even though the Lisa was there first, if we only sell a small number of Lisas and we sell a lot of Macintoshes, the Lisa's the one that's going to get left out in the cold. And so his insight was that it's actually the Lisa that's not Macintosh compatible. Well, we got to go visit Xerox. Steve pulled some strings and got, I think he gave Xerox the right to buy some Apple stock before it went public, and it was a good deal for Xerox. But we had seen publications about full bitmap displays, and that from Xerox and from a few other companies that were playing with it. And what we got to do was to go over and visit for several hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours over at Xerox PARC, and they showed us the Alto system, their older system. They showed us their Smalltalk environment and the Bravo text editor. And I remember, there must be about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us crowded around this thing where they're giving us a demo. And I remember thinking that what I saw was drawing into a non-rectangular area. So if you have a bunch of overlapping windows, one window on top of another makes sort of an L shape out of the one behind it. And so I thought, there must be, there must be some way to draw efficiently into non-rectangular areas. And so knowing that it could be done, I went off and screwed up my head and figured out a way called regions that gave very efficient, maybe 100 times faster than was the traditional thing you do with polygon clipping in a SIGGRAPH core standard, stuff like that. And later, somebody from PARC said, "How did you figure out that region clipping stuff?" And I said, "Well, I thought you guys did that, didn't you?" And he says, No, we didn't. We just, if you had to redraw this L shape, we would draw the whole rectangle, and then we'd have to, the window above, we'd have to redraw it, and there would be a lot of flicker." And I said, well, sometimes, thinking you see something gives you a naive belief in the possible, and so you can go and invent it. I'd say that the visit to Xerox PARC really helped us convinced, yes, we definitely want to do overlapping windows. We already had a bitmap display. We'd already chosen a white background because the black background, if you had a black background, then photos, if you go to print them, they would come out negative. So we'd already switched to a white background, which was different than the Apple II. We'd already gone to a full bitmap display. We already had a mouse on the Lisa prototype. But the visit to PARC kind of consolidated that. And I remember something that's kind of embarrassing and funny is that on the way back, Steve Jobs asked me, how long would it take to implement a window manager like that, or that kind of thing on our Lisa? And I think I said something like, oh, it couldn't take more than 6 months. And, it did take longer than that. Lisa, I don't know, it took maybe 3 years to finish, something like that.
So thank you. I think your answer is great. It puts it in a better perspective too, at least for some people. I think you're just, this Apple stole everything from Xerox and Microsoft stole everything from Apple. No. It's not. It's being influence and inspiration is a lot different than you're just.
For example, they didn't have pull-down menus. They had some little pop-up menus that would have like 5 or 6 items on, and when you clicked one of the mouse buttons, this menu would come up, and sort of depending on where the cursor was, a different menu might show up. But it wasn't really practical to do a real application with, and it wasn't. In the process of developing the Lisa applications, that we had to figure out ways to make really practical solutions, and the pull-down menus was a really better way to do it than these little pop-up things.
Simplifying it and so on.
Like the mouse on the Xerox computers had 2 wheels on it, so you could move up and over, but you couldn't draw a diagonal line any more than you could on an Etch-a-Sketch. And what I think it was Hovey Kelly did for Apple, design firm that Apple hired, is to put a ball in there so that the ball would read off and spin the little wheels, and an optical readout of the little wheels, so that you could actually draw a diagonal line or curve, or use it for a drawing input, not just for a over, up, down pointing device to point at some text. Other changes, other things, there was a lot of engineering that went to developing the Lisa user interface. And one of the most valuable tools was a half-silvered mirror, where we had a test subject, usually a spouse of an Apple employee, trying to do something. And we had in the ceiling, we had one camera pointing down at the mouse and the keyboard, and one pointing into the screen with their face reflected on it. And those synchronized video recorders would capture what was going on, and we give them a task and usually ask them to kind of mutter under their breath a stream of consciousness, because what some people's thinking tells you a lot about how they misunderstand it. And an example of this would be, we'd tell somebody to edit this document and save it, and they'd get to the point where they're supposed to choose between do it and cancel. And they'd look a little miffed, and they hit cancel, and they'd lose the edits they'd done. They hit cancel, I didn't save it. And we saw, wait a minute, somebody did that last week, the same expression of looking a little miffed. So we cranked up the volume on the video recorders, and he said, what's this dolt? I'm no dolt. See, we knew it was the word D-O uppercase I-T, do it, 2 words. But it looked to them like lowercase l-T, dolt. So they had a choice between dolt and cancel. They're not going to hit the one that says dolt. So things like that sort of show up from when the engineers know what it says. They have a little bit of a blind spot. We couldn't read that as dolt, but users did. So we changed it, and we changed it to OK and cancel. We didn't really like OK because it was an abbreviation, a colloquialism. And in hindsight, looking back now, it should have said save and cancel. There should be active verbs on each one, not do it. Never do it, right? Do it doesn't say do what, right? Save and cancel, right? It should be active verbs. But at least by changing it to OK and cancel instead of do it or dolt and cancel, it got us through the night. There were a lot of examples like that where we engineered it into existence. For example, when you want to scroll a document, you got a scroll bar here, do you press on an up arrow or a down arrow to see what's later in the document? So one logic is that since you want to see what's later in the document, you press on a down arrow, right, to see what's down. But in so doing, the document has to scroll up. So some logic says you press on an up arrow to move the document up. And so we tried experiments on users, and we had the 2 arrows there, and we said, show us what's later in the document.
And it wasn't even 60-40. It was 50-50 which arrow they would go for. And then we tried moving the arrows apart, where this one was here and this one was there. And then they would always go for this one to see what's later, always go for this one to see what's earlier. It was not the direction of the arrows, it was the position of the arrows that mattered. And we ended up going with a down arrow for show me what's more later. And later, years later, when Apple did the iPad, they had to switch it, because on the iPad you scrub up to see what's down below. So the push up had made more sense with an up arrow. So we actually got it wrong. But a lot of these things were things we just used a lot of user testing. So when people say we just went to Xerox and stole their ideas, that's just wrong. We got inspiration, but we had to do a lot of engineering on top of that. I got into a little bit of trouble when Microsoft, Apple were having this pissing match over user interface, the lawsuit. And the Microsoft, the testimony that I gave was basically that intelligent engineers with a lot of work and testing would come up with some of the same conclusions. This isn't art where you draw a painting and somebody else takes a photograph of your painting. Well, that's stealing their art. But the engineering part of this is that other people would come to the same conclusion as long as they did the research and did have silver mirror and working with. They would decide that dolt is a bad thing to put on a button, so you don't do that, or which way arrows grow, or things like that. Apple didn't like that answer because it kind of went against their case that Microsoft had stole their copyright work.